All right, traders, good afternoon. This is Christian from Tribeca Trade Group, and it is Wednesday, October 30th. One more day of the month, action packed day. So, before we get into that, everything that we're going to talk about today is for information purposes only, not giving out any advice or recommendations. But man, we had a lot of things go on today. Just a huge amount of earnings reports. We'll go through some of those. And then, of course, Powell testified today, cut rates by a quarter of a point, 25 basis points, and then basically said, they're going to kind of wait and see and so forth, so on and so forth. So, all along, that's been my view. I've been talking about that this week. I talked about that there was over a 90% chance that was being priced in with Fed fund futures. So the market expected that, and I don't think that the market really, is putting that much pressure on any future cuts. They basically are there if they need to be, and I think that's good enough. I was wondering what the reaction was. We'll go over to S&P futures. Sometimes it's a little bit of that shake and bake, and they waited to the press conference. I don't think there was anything really that he said particularly that drove the market higher. I just think it was what he didn't say, right? He didn't, there's been a couple press conferences where he said something bad and the market took didn't take kindly to it. I don't think he really said anything substantially about, he said the same type of things. Inflation is low, growth is moderate, yada yada yada. I think anybody at this point can kind of say these things that we know. Some economics are coming out okay, some are a little bit weak. They're going to continue to watch the weaker ones. It's the same. I mean, it's literally the same song and dance. The fact that he didn't say anything like, you know, substantially negative, I think that's what kind of given the market gave the market a boost this afternoon. The market kind of seemed like it was wait and see all morning until that happened. So you could see we are rallying a little bit. I just had Apple up. These days are basically all about earnings. The option flow that we see is just peppered with names that are reporting either after the close, before the, tomorrow and the next coming week. So it's really, really noisy. Every time I post one of these, I basically say, oh, well, they report earnings the next day. And you really never know what they're doing with those. If they're hedging, they could be hedging a short, they could be hedging a long by buying puts. That's a lot of. There's more hedging, I think, that goes on besides speculating. My opinion around earnings. Facebook also up off the highs. I'm surprised a couple of these reports the stocks aren't higher. I played Facebook. I actually need Facebook to go a little bit higher. I'm in a call spread 192, 202 and a half. Apple, I would have sold premium here, but I did not do it. It looks like good numbers for them. Really wide guidance for Apple. Let's see if I still have the Apple results up here. A lot of headlines, so I think people also kind of breaking down the numbers, but the guidance, you could drive a truck through this guidance, very wide, 85 and a half to 89. So again, that's better. The midpoint is better than expectations. The numbers look really solid. So again, why is it not up higher? Probably Apple, because it really ran into the report. We talked about that, and I mentioned how I did not want to really do much with it. I was showing some examples of other stocks that did this, that had heavy volume like this. Right before earnings. I was showing this morning was Crocs. Same thing for now. Again, Crocs made an absolute huge move, but you really have to be a little bit careful. Look at the volume pickup yesterday after a big run, and this was no sell signal, right? So you really if you read into these things a little bit too much. I was mentioning that some people I saw on Twitter yesterday were talking about, oh, look at the volume in Apple. They must know something. No, they're just taking profits right after a huge run. And, I think with the results, I think I was spot on with that. Some few other names, there's plenty of other names that reported after the close. My Thinkorswim looks like it's tired right now. But again, I think good results just kind of sets the bar pretty high. So, it's basically back to the highs of this week. But again, I think you have to keep in mind that Apple has gone basically nuts the last, couple months. So, That's Apple. Who else reported? Interesting. Twilio. Their guidance was pretty nasty. So there's a couple nasty reports out there too. OLED is up nicely here, up to 194. This stock has done nothing. The last, has really not participated much since it sold off. Well, now it's going to be up pretty nicely, and we've seen that out of a couple companies. Zynga had a nice report. Just kind of going through some more names here. Again, there's about like 15 names that reported that I think are all pretty interesting. Up to 645, pretty low price stock. Triple D reported. I think they're actually down. That's good. I was going to play them and I didn't. Oh, Starbucks. That was another name that I played. I just thought it was a little bit cheap. I've already hedged a little bit. I've hedged at 86.70. Again, if you're trading options, I can't stress that enough. If you don't know how to hedge in the aftermarket, you probably, I hate to say this, but you probably should not be trading options if you don't know how to compute delta and lock in some profits, especially with how these names trade in the after hours. So very important, because then if you're hedging a little bit, the gain on your options and the stock sells off, you could always go and buy the stock back as well. But in any event, very important to know that, to know how to do that. So what else? There's another report out. QLYS looks like they just missed. So it should be interesting. I think so. To kind of summarize today's price action, I would say most like large cap names really didn't do much all day, but there was a lot of like squeeze plays that were going on. A lot of your momentum plays. I think I'm going out on a limb saying that there was a little bit of probably short covering going into the FOMC. But if you look at names like Zoom and Crowds, like a lot of the IPO names, right? These names are momentum type names. They're not names that I traffic in that much because they're super volatile. They're very difficult to play with options, and they're kind of all in the same bucket, right? They all kind of move together. But a couple standout names: Adobe. I've been watching this Adobe for a while. This has now broken this channel. No earnings. Remember, it already reported earnings back here, so this will be a name to watch for tomorrow. Also, a couple of my picks. I've been sending out or talking about 2 or 3 names every pre-market session that we do for Tribeca Trade Group members. And today I talked about the 2 names that I talked about were Microsoft. So again, having some nice success with calling some of these out. Yesterday it was a couple of the healthcare names that did pretty well, CNC and United Healthcare. Microsoft, was talking about how this has been digesting the last couple of days. I thought it also looked good on the hourly, and Microsoft did very well. So again, my job, I can't. It's tough for me to get into every one of these trades because I'm doing a lot. But I at least try to call out what names I think look pretty good. Let's see how this finished on the 1 hour today. Yeah, here was where this was this morning. So nice move. The other name that I talked about was UTX. And this also did pretty good. I still, if you did not get into UTX, I still like it. It had earnings. If you just zoom in here a little bit, had earnings, rallied, and then kind of digest the gains. I like when stocks do this, when there's a big green candle, inside day, inside day, inside day, and then boom. So really nice there. All right, so I think I know that there's a lot more things to talk about, but my video last night was pretty long and in depth. Again, I'm going to say this. I'll end this saying the same thing as I've been saying. I love when the market does this. Right, we're breaking out to new highs. There's no resistance. You got to stick with the trend, in my opinion. Again, I'm not telling you what to do or giving out any advice, but my experience, you stick with the trend until you start to break. Either you start to see some divergences in the market, which currently I'm not really seeing, which again, that could change in a day. But learn to embrace, right? We've talked about a lot of different things. We've talked about how we don't want to see big volume on a breakout, right? You want to see volume on the turns, not on this. And so far, that's working, right? I think people are being too critical of what they're feeling and reading about and God knows what, instead of just following price. I mean, you've got a beautiful, people have been complaining for months about, oh, the market can't break out, it, blah, 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 can't do this. You got it, embrace it. I'm not fading this. I'm going with it until I see something that either tells me if price starts to drop below. One of the things that I have on my charts is the 5 period moving average. As long as price is stays above the 5 period moving average, which is super short, I want to stay with it. As long as I'm not seeing any major divergences, meaning breadth falling apart, the VIX going up when the market's going up, things like that, which we're not, then you want to, in my opinion, try to stick with it as much as possible. It doesn't mean get over the tips of your skis with risk. Take targets, take profits, roll out and up, do those types of things. But this is fun stuff when this happens. All right, guys, have a wonderful night. See you tomorrow.